We live in an imaginary world, right? Everything you see around you that we have right now in our modern industrial society was imagined up, was conceived of, was thought of by some person in our history, right? Houses, roads, mathematics, time, any type of human tool we use now to live our lives was kind of just conceived of, was made up by some of our ancestors. You know, like houses, like some person in our history was kind of overwhelmed by the forces of nature, and so he dreamed up of like this idea of having like some type of box that he could crawl into, and he could stay safe and warm, and he could not be overwhelmed by the forces of nature. And this one guy, he got a bunch of mud together, and he kind of formed like some type of hut that he can go into, and that idea spread around his tribe, and then it like wildfire spread around a bunch of other human tribes, and now it's like housing is adopted all over the world, right? And of course, a lot of people would argue, well, housing, like it could have been independently invented. It probably didn't only originate from one guy, but regardless, it was made and born from the human imagination, right? It was completely imagined up by some person, maybe not one specific person, but someone in our, like a bunch of people in our history. They kind of had to pave the way for housing to develop in the human psyche, in our development in our history and stuff. Of course, another good example would be mathematics. Math wasn't discovered in nature, right? You look outside, you go to any forest, you won't be able to see any mathematical numerals. You won't be able to see math, like the actual numbers, like kind of etched onto the ground or on tree bark or on other things like that exist outside of the human world, like outside of this like industrial society we've kind of made for ourselves. Right? Math is just it wasn't discovered, it was invented, it was conceived of, it was like thought of by human minds, right? We imagined up mathematics, all of the rules, all of the symbols, man. Some person in our history was probably struggling to keep track of like something he had, like maybe his livestock or perhaps some other type of things that he was like kind of using to finance or to kind of trade or barter with, and he kind of conceived of like the earliest form of mathematics. He laid out a bunch of symbols to attribute to like each individual product he had, and then he kind of used this to kind of write and keep records and tracks of what he was selling and buying and getting rid of and stuff. And this was probably the earliest form of mathematics. And then we kept imagining more and more complexities for math. We kept applying it onto mathematics. We kept kind of making math more and more complex with our minds, with our imagination, and that's kind of something that's very magical and bizarre, but still a lot of people don't appreciate that. Math is like something that it was born from the human imagination. It wasn't something that was just naturally discovered in the animal kingdom or something like that, right? We can't find math in nature. Of course, not just math. It kind of apply this. Like a lot of things were just kind of born from the human imagination. A lot of things that we're just so used to now, right? Cards, books, writing, forms of government, laws, ordering society, specific in various different ways. Like nature doesn't give us like a rule book to like, all right, this is how you should kind of organize your society. You need to have like laws and human rights, all of this stuff. Morality, this is just born from the human imagination, and a lot of people don't really appreciate this. Right? We really do live in like an imaginary world, right? If you can kind of look at the animal kingdom, like animals just do what they feel like doing, right? They don't really think twice, right? If you look into a human society, you have all of these imaginary laws, right? Laws aren't physical. They're not something that can be tested and proven, right? They're just something we imagine in our heads. And you ought to just follow these laws for the sake of doing that, right? It's not something that you need to actually do, but we still do it anyway because a lot of people, we all live inside of like this imaginary world that we've been kind of indoctrinated into, and now we feel like it's real, this imaginary world that has laws and rules and morality and human rights and laws and government and stuff. All of this is just imaginary. It's not actually a natural force. It's not real in the same way as like gravity or any other type of natural phenomenon. Like it's so bizarre. Perhaps maybe the closest, like there is no other animal that has like this dual reality that he lives in, where he lives like any basic animal, like any wild cat or dog, or wolf, they just exist in their own. They just exist in a cold, brutal, kind of a world without laws, without morality, without any types of rights, animal rights or whatever. They just do what they feel is doing. They like whatever they feel is like right and appropriate, and they just do that, whether it be rape or murdering their fellow tribes people or animals or wolves or dogs or cats or whatever. They don't live in this dual reality where they have like this human rights, they have morality and stuff, they have laws and government. They don't have this type of imagination that we have, and that we use to like create this separate reality that we have to kind of live in. That's very bizarre, isn't it? Right? Nah. So many of the different things that we're used to are just completely imaginary. They were imagined up by our own heads. They're not naturally occurring forces and phenomenon. Math is probably the best example. It was not discovered. It was imagined by us. It was imagined by a lot of people in our history. And if these people didn't imagine up mathematics, math would not have existed. It's something we, again, made up in our heads, and that's something you have to kind of appreciate, just like human rights, just like morality, just like laws and government, and a bunch of other stuff in our modern industrial society. It was imagined up. We live literally in an imaginary world, and a lot of people are kind of very disillusioned and kind of indoctrinated into thinking that this imaginary world is actually real, that there are actually like human rights, morality, laws, and government. This is like a natural phenomenon like gravity, when it's just something we imagined up. It's completely imaginary, and you have to kind of appreciate that.